Okay, so let's just jump right into this. Picture this. It's April 17th, 2026, and the entire world wakes up to some absolutely stunning news coming out of the planet's most important energy choke point. I mean, one minute it looks like we are teetering on the edge of a major crisis, and the very next it feels like a massive breakthrough. But as we're about to find out, the real story here is, well, it's a whole lot more complicated than that.
The very first clue that something huge had just gone down was this number. Global crude oil prices took a nosedive. We're talking as much as 13% in a single day. A drop that big, that fast, it tells you there's been a massive, fundamental shift in how the market sees the future. And it all came back to one single, incredibly strategic waterway.
And this is why. President Trump gets on Truth Social and posts this really celebratory message. Iran, which had been seriously restricting traffic, was suddenly reopening the strait. I mean, this was the exact announcement the world was holding its breath for. It really seemed to signal that a huge geopolitical standoff was finally over.
Now, to really get the gravity of this, we have to remember what we're talking about here. The Strait of Hormuz, it's not just some random body of water. A staggering 1/5, 20% of the entire world's oil supply has to pass through this one narrow channel. So any disruption, any problem here sends these immediate, powerful shockwaves through the global economy. And that's exactly why its reopening was such a massive, massive deal.
Right. That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? You see oil prices dropping, you see these celebratory messages, and it's really easy to think, okay, phew, the danger has passed. But the reality on the ground, or, on the water, was way more complex.
Because just as the world was breathing this collective sigh of relief, we got another announcement from the Pentagon and the White House. And it was a big one. Turns out, despite Iran's big move, a really key piece of this whole conflict was still very much in play.
And this slide just lays out the central tension perfectly. On one side, you've got Iran saying, hey, the strait is completely open for business, for everybody. But then on the other side, the U.S. confirms its naval blockade on all traffic going to and from Iranian ports is still on. So wait a minute, how can both of these things be true at the same time?
Well, President Trump actually gave us the answer himself, just minutes after that first post. He clarified that yes, the blockade would stay active, and it was staying active as leverage. So the crucial takeaway here is that this isn't some contradiction, it's a negotiation tactic. That blockade is the pressure being applied to get a much larger deal over the finish line.
So what does this blockade actually look like in practice? Well, it kicked off on April 13th, and it's really important to note it's not a full closure of the strait. It's a very precise, targeted action against Iran's own ports. It's being enforced by the U.S. Navy's Central Command, CENTCOM, which is the part of the military that runs operations in the Middle East. And by all accounts, it's been a super tight seal. No known breaches. This is economic pressure, pure and simple.
So, what we're really watching here isn't the end of a crisis. It's actually a brand new, and you could argue, an even more high-stakes phase. It's a standoff, and it's playing out in real time, with the entire world's energy security just hanging in the balance.
You know what's really wild when you look at it like this is just the sheer speed of these events. On the 13th, the U.S. starts the blockade. Just 4 days later, in the morning, Iran reopens the strait. And then, within hours, the U.S. clarifies its blockade is still on. I mean, this is geopolitical chess being played at lightning speed.
And the U.S. endgame here couldn't be clearer. This blockade is the final lever, the final push, to get Iran to complete a huge, comprehensive deal that covers both nuclear issues and trade. It's a massive power move, and it's designed to bring these long-stalled negotiations to a final, definitive close. Now, this whole high-stakes situation in the Persian Gulf isn't happening in a vacuum. At the exact same time, back in Washington, the Trump administration was signaling some really ambitious plans for the U.S. economy. And, as it turns out, the two things might be a lot more connected than you'd think.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick came out with this incredibly optimistic forecast. He was talking about the U.S. economy hopefully hitting 5 to 6% GDP growth in 2026, and he tied it to a whole strategy of tariffs, bringing manufacturing back, and what he hoped would be lower interest rates.
But he didn't stop there. Lutnick also hinted at a major pivot in U.S. trade policy. He called the current trade deal with Mexico and Canada, the USMCA, a poor deal that needed a complete rethink. This really suggests a much broader shift in where the U.S. is focusing its economic energy.
And he was even more direct in his criticism of Canada's relationship with China. He called it the worst strategy, which is a pretty strong hint that future U.S. trade deals might start moving away from our North American neighbors and toward forging new, maybe more aggressive deals somewhere else.
All of which brings us right back to the central question of this whole affair. Did we just witness a genuine breakthrough, one that's going to lead to a lasting agreement? Or is this just a temporary pause in a conflict that's actually far from over?
The reality is that we're in this deeply uneasy calm. The whole situation is fragile because that main US-Iran deal, it's still not signed. And there is a very real risk that Iran could just decide to reclose the strait if this blockade drags on too long. And because of all that uncertainty, global markets, they're relieved for now, but they are still on a complete knife set. So that's where we are. The waterway is open, but the blockade is still in place. Everything, and I mean everything, hinges on whether these high-stakes negotiations can actually produce a lasting peace deal. Because the alternative is that we go right back to the brink and tensions flare up all over again. The whole world is watching to see which way this goes.